Welcome to the ListenUp Podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the ListenUp Podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by ListenUp Hearing Centers. I help people to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they can connect better with friends and family and remain independent. The reason I'm so passionate about hearing loss is because I lost my brother Robbie twice. First, to his hearing loss from the radiation to his brain tumor, and then when he passed away. I am the E of ENT. I only care for ears. I've done over 10,000 ear surgeries and taken care of many more with nerve hearing loss. I'm the founder of ListenUp Hearing Center, and I've written a book by the same name, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you'd like to learn more about that, go to listenuphearing.com. That's www.listenuphearing.com. Today, I have an awesome guest. I have a guy who's been an audiologist for 50 years. It's Dr. Gus Mueller, or Gustav Mueller. He goes by Gus Mueller. He's an internationally known researcher, lecturer, editor, and author. He has been a fixture in audiology community for decades and has served in various roles in industry, academia, administration, and publishing. He's currently has a private consulting practice nestled between the tundra and reality on the island of west of Bismarck, North Dakota. Since the early 1990s, audiologists have been treated to Gus' monthly journal columns, now numbering over 300. Originally, you could find it under page 10 in the Hearing Journal. Now, for the past 12 years, it's been on with 200 with Gus in Audiology in Line, where he is a contributing editor. He's an expert on real ear measurement, or has written extensively about it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Gus, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, this is great. This is a conversation I want to have for a long time, because I am a fledgling clinician trying to understand some of these concepts in academia or audiology for the sake of the benefit of my patients. And
Sure.
This is one that I really want to try to understand. So before we talk about real ear measurement, I had sent you a note saying, like, I'd like to talk about the alternatives to your real ear measurement. Your answer was, here's the article I wrote, that there are no alternatives to real ear measurement. I totally get that. But unfortunately, as you know, or probe mic measurements, as well as I do, unfortunately, many, many patients out there who are trying to have their hearing loss treated do not get that. So what are the alternatives that are being used, that are being tried to use? So the concept we're talking about is, maybe you could talk about verification or validation, et cetera.
Well, it's hard to know where to start, but here's one starting point.
Okay.
And that is manufacturers have their own algorithm that they recommend for fitting their specific hearing aid. Let me back up just a minute, and that is, over decades, we have known that there is a prescriptive way to fit hearing aids, and it's pretty darn good. It's been verified. The procedures have been repeated and tweaked, and this goes back 45 years. And there's a way to look at a person's hearing loss, to look at their loudness levels, and decide, how do we package speech to get above the floor and stay just below the ceiling. Okay. And I think we're going to get to what are called the validated prescriptive methods before we finish our conversation.
Sure.
But now, with that base and laying that groundwork, let me say that one alternative, by far the most common alternative, is for somebody fitting hearing aids, is to use the manufacturer's algorithm, which is in the manufacturer's software. It's a one mouse click, and you simply click and you say to the patient, very, very encouragingly, how does that sound? Okay. Or you might say, bet that sounds good, doesn't it? These algorithms are designed for first acceptance. The average new users, what they want a hearing aid to sound like is no hearing aid. So what manufacturers have done is made their initial fitting sound like no hearing aid, and patients tend to like it. Now, they're not going to benefit from, they're not going to be satisfied once they get out in the world. But by then, it's probably too late. They've already bought into it. they sort of have heard that maybe hearing aids aren't great in the first place. So this is what they're left with. And they assume, since they went to a major hospital or a clinic or a fancy office, that what they got is as good as it's going to get. So that by far is the number one alternative. Just click and fit and hope you get lucky.
So the term that I've been told or used is first fit.
Correct.
Programming, right? In other words, so for the listeners here, the point is giving people a satisfactory first fit so they keep the hearing aid, don't say it sounds bad, and with the goal more of them getting through a trial period of either 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, 75 days, something of that nature, so they actually complete, unfortunately, the sale, meaning they get sold. Correct. As compared to, I think what you're referring to is that actually doesn't get you to what you were talking about, where we know what the ideal fit, meaning that people can actually have a prescription in their hearing aid that gives them the best hearing treatment possible. I think that's
correct. If indeed the goal was to use this initial proprietary fit sort of as training wheels, and then week after week after week, you ease the person into where they should be, then I wouldn't have a problem with that. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. What happens is
when I learned that 90% of hearing aids have first fit programming. Yes. I was confounded.
And because what happens is the patient comes back after 2 weeks or so, and you say, "Well, Martha, how does that sound?" And Martha goes, "Yeah, it's not too bad." Well, are you going to go in and start raising gain to where it was supposed to be, or you are just going to be delighted that Martha's happy? And Martha wants to keep her hearing aids. I might mention a colleague of mine, Ron Levitt, who has a big practice out in Oregon in Corvallis, published a study a few years ago. He does a rehab group there, and people come in from all over the state of Oregon that have been fitted by other professionals. But before he puts them into the rehabilitative group on a Saturday and Sunday, they come in on Friday, and he checks to see how well they're fitted. So these aren't people that he's fitted. And what he has found that, and I might be off by a couple percentage points here, but roughly 97% are underfit by more than 5 dB, and 70% are underfit by more than 10 dB. 10 dB is huge. That can change somebody's life. And these are people who have been using their hearing aids.
Yeah, especially, one of the things that I found very hard to get a good concept. So for the listeners, the audiologic scale is logarithmic. And so what that means is about every 3 decibel is a doubling in the sound intensity. So
exactly.
When you say 10 dB, you mean one doubling and then another doubling and then a double doubling and then more.
Sure.
That's a huge difference in terms of what
in many cases, we look at just noticeable differences, and that is, a JND, and 10 dB is a lot of JNDs. Mm-hmm. And relative to what you're saying, Mark, is that it also has to do with why these hearing aids have to be carefully programmed, is because let's take somebody with a 50 dB loss, which is not uncommon. And just to keep it simple, we'll say it's a perfectly flat audiogram, equal loss at all frequencies. It usually isn't, but it'll make the picture easier to see. If this person then, when fitted correctly, is going to need about 30 decibels of gain for soft sounds, because we need to put soft sounds above the floor to make them audible.
Right.
But a person with a 50 dB cochlear loss, and 95% of them are going to be cochlear, their loudness level for loud sounds is the same as somebody with normal hearing. Doesn't change. Doesn't start going up till a 60 dB loss. So the point where loud sounds first become uncomfortable is around 100 dB. So we have what used to be, when the person was young, 100 dB window to package in the world. We now have a 50 dB window to package in the world.
Between loud enough and too loud.
Correct. In between audible and loud, but okay, but not too loud. So this takes very careful programming. And what happens is with these first fits, they tend to be geared to make sounds sound okay for average. But when you do that, soft sounds will be inaudible and loud sounds will probably be too loud. And the patient will try to fiddle with the volume control, if they even have a volume control. And they rapidly then become unhappy, which is why things need to be carefully programmed.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You know, I've had a lot of discussions both in the show and with other people about low adoption rate. Why are there, you know, so as a ballpark, as you know, only 20% of people with a treatable hearing loss treated. And,
Correct.
you know, and there's a current movement to say that it's price, as you know, because the over-the-counter market has just opened up for a point of timing of when we're having this. I think it's pure experience. I think that people talk to other people, and those people are not as satisfied with their hearing rehabilitation that they don't say, hey, yeah, you should do it. I mean, I didn't know anybody who got an iPhone who told me I shouldn't get an iPhone, right? Everybody
Right.
said, things are great, go get one. That's not, unfortunately, the typical peer experience or patient experience is to say like, hey, I have these hearing aids. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You should go ahead and do it. It's actually the exact opposite. People say, I don't know anybody who's happy with their hearing aids.
Yeah, well, exactly. And as I just mentioned you from that Oregon study, if that larger percentage of people is underfit, you wouldn't expect them to be very happy.
Right.
And then you better believe, as you say, they're going to tell all their friends. When their friends are going to say, hey, Joe, I thought you got hearing aids. Yeah, they don't work very well. I don't get them. Well, you know, Frank isn't going to go out and spend $6,000 when he just heard that from Joe, because Joe's his friend.
Yeah, I say there are three groups. One got them and returned them.
Yeah.
The second got them and put them in their nightstand drawer. The third wears them and says they don't hear any better. And
Yeah.
so those are by and large people's peer experience rather than people like saying, this is great. I needed these. These are awesome.
Yeah. I have to say, I don't know if you follow the Market Track 10 surveys. And for our listeners, these are available online. They're not hidden away in a journal that's hard to access. And it's Market Track, and the late Market Track 10, what came out about 2 years ago. There's some encouraging things in there that we have a long way to go, but there's an encouraging things that we're getting better. People who had just gotten hearing aids in the last year. And granted, many of them were not fit correctly, but for listening in quiet, something like 90% of them are satisfied. For listening in background noise, I was surprised at this. The satisfaction rate is gone up to in the 70s, I believe, 70% or so. 20 years ago, I think it was 30% for listening in background noise. So it's baby steps, but we are making progress. What we hope is that those people are now telling other people that hearing aids really do work.
Yeah. So, and we'll touch with this with realtors. So the way I present it to people is that just means that they believe that their hearing loss is less bad with hearing aids, not ideally rehabilitated.
Right.
And so for the listeners, Market Track is a repetitive market survey that the industry does about people and their perceptions of hearing aids. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Probably the only thing I think about it it doesn't give us access to are the people who don't have hearing aids. It actually surveys the people who do have hearing aids.
No, that isn't correct, Mark. They have a whole separate section of people with admitted hearing loss who have not purchased hearing aids.
So I guess,
so what they, which is very interesting because they have a whole. Now it isn't a purely matched. So the ones with you don't know that they have the same hearing loss as the others, but they have a lot of comparisons of people with hearing aids, who comparing them to the people say, I have a hearing loss, but I haven't gotten hearing aids. And there's some really interesting things relative to quality of life, socialization. It's an interesting area to look into. If I were in the business of selling hearing aids, it would be one of the first studies that I would show potential hearing aid users to show there really is a difference there.
Yeah. I should stand corrected. My mind was wrong. It's the people who are unaware of hearing loss, of their hearing.
Right.
You have to be aware to get it. And so, yes, you're correct. Like, so in other words, they're comparing the people who know they have a hearing loss, haven't done anything about it, the people who have a hearing loss and have done it.
Correct. Who admit they have a hearing loss.
Right.
But of course, there's this whole group who don't think they have a hearing loss, and they really do, which is a large group.
And so there are other things like some practitioners think they're doing, like where they'll speak to patients or take them out into the environment. What type of other things do, I mean, what other types of things do people kind of do?
Well, what would seem like a logical thing to do, except it doesn't work, is to do speech testing. Because you think about it, if you go to an optometrist and you complain you can't see from distance or close or whatever, before you leave, they usually give you a chance to make sure what they're fitting you with really works. So people come in saying that they can't understand speech and background noise. It would seem logical that we would do speech and noise tests to find out what is the best hearing aid. Although it's logical, it doesn't work for a variety of reasons, partly because the tests aren't quite sensitive enough unless you have really big differences. It would take a long time because, when do you stop? You program it this way, then you program it this way, then you program it this way, then you try this model hearing aid. It could go on forever. And the third, maybe important thing is that there isn't a real high correlation between how somebody performs in a clinic to a standardized speech test to their benefit and satisfaction in the real world, where there are so many other factors that enter in. But relative to alternative approaches, I suspect that there are some places that do the manufacturer's first fit, sit the person down in a test booth and do a speech test, probably a very easy speech test, and the patient does okay, and they're out the door.
Right. And we'll talk about it because there might be a role after real ear measurement, but that's
absolutely, absolutely. It's a great counseling tool.
Right.
It's a nice way to show that hearing aids work. I just don't think it's a very good way to pick the best fitting for a given patient.
Right. I agree 100%. And so, one of the things and you can correct me because you are really facile at this stuff. As in hearing loss, presbycusis, the hearing loss of aging, typically involves a larger high tone hearing loss than low tone hearing loss. And that's actually one of the largest complaints of patients when they're immediate fit is stuff is too loud in the high tones, too tinny, and they don't like it. And in a response to that, the first fit algorithms that the manufacturers have actually kind of decrease, particularly the high tone gain because of that complaint. And that then makes them underfit, particularly in that region. Is that the case?
That is absolutely true. And you can take out the word kinda. They drastically roll off the highs. There's a second reason for that is because if you roll off the highs, your feedback reduction system doesn't have to be so good. And what you'll find, there's a relationship between the manufacturers who have the better feedback reduction system won't roll off the highs as much as the ones who have a really crappy feedback reduction system. But anyway, back to your point, Mike Valente, who a well-known audiologist and researcher who is out of the University of Washington at St. Louis, recently did, this was a peer-reviewed publication, crossover study. He looked at the average air, I'm going to call it, where people were not fitted to prescriptive using the manufacturer's proprietary approach, what you've referred to as first fit, many people have. In the high frequencies, the mean at 4,000 hertz was 20 dB below prescription.
Wow.
At 3,000 hertz, it was around 15. At 2,000, it was around 10 dB. So as I say, they don't kind of roll it off. Most of them drastically roll it off. And you're right. If you fit a person correctly, it is very possible that on the initial programming, the comment that you will get is, wow, this sounds tinny. Oh, geez. And it should. These people haven't heard these sounds for 15 to 20 years. It should sound tinny.
That's what I tell them. I tell them it's like, going from a dark room to a bright light. Your ear and brain aren't used to it, and it takes time. And that's why when I ask patients who come to me who are not happy with their hearing aids, I always ask, well, how much follow-up did you have? And many of them, it's one fit. And so I call it first fit and forget it, right? Oh, you're good. Come back and see me if you need me.
Yeah. Well, when I was in private, I dispensed hearing aids in the U.S. Army for 20 years. People didn't whine as much then because they were getting them free. But then when I went into private practice for 5 years, and of course I heard that common complaint, and my line to them, I don't know if it really worked or not, but it was the only line I had was, I'm not trying to make you happy for the next 5 to 10 days. I'm trying to make you happy for the next 5 to 10 years.
Of course. Right?
So stick with me. Your brain will catch up. It's just going to take a while, which is all the more reason you need to wear these hearing aids, even when you're in quiet. Because the brain's a pretty amazing thing. Recently, you probably have followed this. There's a lot of documentation. One of them coming from Anu Sharma out of University of Boulder, looking at changes in the temporal lobe following hearing aid use when the hearing aids were correctly fitted, and maybe not so much when they weren't fitted correctly.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things that really wanted me to get you as a guest, right? Like, so there's a lot of policy being thrown around right now where the underlying little asterisk is, this all makes sense if the hearing aids are actually appropriately fitted and programmed. And unfortunately, that's a really big asterisk because most of them aren't. So, it's a big problem, right? You have to have it fit right before, getting the instrument doesn't matter. Getting the instrument with the correct programming is highly important.
Yes. I travel a lot, and usually, if I'm lucky enough to get bumped up to first class, after about the third Chardonnay, the guy next to me elbows me. And so what do you do? And of course, as soon as I say audiologist, the old days, they used to go, what? But now they say, yeah, I need hearing aids. What brand should I get?
Yes.
And my answer is the same every time. It's not the brand, it's the person doing the fitting. You can pick the best brand in the world, and it will be a piece of crap if it's not fitted correctly. It makes
that's great. You know where that resonated with me? The first time I really hit home. I mean, it's a pop cultural reference, but in the new Top Gun, Tom Cruise, its character looks to one of the younger guys and he goes, "It's the pilot, not the plane."
Yeah. Well,
or by analogy, it's the mason, not the bricks. It's the painter, not the paint. I mean, people know that it's the skill but that's what the companies want. They want us to think it's their widget over somebody else's widget.
And that's unfortunately, I can see where the average consumer thinks of it that way. They think of it as a commodity. And I can tell you, audiologists are partly to blame for this by bundling everything. When they started selling hearing aids, they started to use I'd say 80-90% of audiologists use the model that was used by hearing aid dispensers. And that is just to bundle everything. I think had we separated from the very beginning the cost of the hearing aid versus the cost of our services, I think our services would be valued more now, and people would see the value, because there would be a dollar amount. I mean, I think now people think that they're it's the widget that they're buying, and this other person there just stuck it on their ear and pushed a couple buttons, and they're not all that important. It's going to all come true when we hit over-the-counter hearing aids. We're going to find out how important we are or not.
Well, I think, frankly, my take on that is if you're going to charge multiples of thousands of dollars and give people the exact same hearing experience as somebody who can go get an over the counter that's auto programmed, you're out of luck. I mean, you're not offering people value. It's going to be the people who are doing all of the other things that are going to be. I mean, it's interesting. We in our home we've had a very talented Polish carpenter. And he is always charged our labor plus materials. So he always takes the labor or the materials out, has you pay for that, and then he shows you what he charges you for labor because he's smart, because he knows he's more expensive rather than these people who kind of bundle and push down. But you know what? The beauty is just, as a quick aside, I never have to ask him to do it twice, and I never have to correct his work. And that's really what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And especially this is your healthcare in your brain, not, look, I want the door to hang right too, but that's not really as devastating as not being able to.
I know, but the average consumer just doesn't know any better, is the sad part about it. Well, I think if they knew the difference, then they would demand better service, I think.
Yeah. Well, I always say you don't know what you're not hearing.
Sure.
So, I mean, that fundamental concept. And I think actually to some extent, we have fallen into that trap with things like surveys and things like that. So, when I go back and look at some of these surveys in the literature, some of the tests, the studies show that the survey results don't correlate with the audiogram, which means patients' subjective assessment of their hearing loss does not correlate with the objective measurement of their hearing. So then why do we try to get people to tell us? I mean, I get it motivates them to treat, but the answer is even if you don't perceive your hearing loss, you have an objective thing called hearing loss and you need to treat it. That's kind of
absolutely.
So yeah, it's definitely, I think, I'm trying to, that's some of the stuff in the book that I'm trying to get to. I don't think it's as easy for people to do it, but people ask me all the time. That is exactly right. What brand should I get? And so the other question I say, what brand of plywood is in your home? And they kind of look at me and I go, you don't know. And they're like, right. Yeah. I said, you entrusted the carpenter to put the good wood in and put it in correctly. And so you have to stop. But these multi-billion-dollar corporations, they certainly want you to think their brand matters, right?
Yeah, and there have been several studies where they take the big six, which I guess you could argue is now the big five, but let's take the big six because there's still six premier products, and they've programmed them all the same, okay, right. To the prescriptive target that we mentioned earlier, and when they do that, the differences among products is very small. Because they all sort of are the same, But as soon as they start using their proprietary fits, which are all somewhat different, then you start to see big differences. And of course, it's always lower than the prescriptive fitting that they could have had.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I spoke to another clinician who was talking about maybe not on first fit, and that's why I was talking about hearing and noise, that they do see some performance differences when they're doing hearing and noise testing with an appropriately prescriptive fit. And we can talk a little bit about that.
Boy, those differences are going to be small. I'd say, I've consulted for a hearing aid company for 30 years, and I've worked with their clinical trials. And in the clinical trials, we always pick the brand that I'm consulting for and 3 competitors. And we run the 4, we run them against each other. And when we have 24 people, we can get a statistical difference. But in the clinic, these differences are small. Right. If you ask the average audiologist what brand has the best noise reduction, the best directional technology, whatever, the answer is always going to be the brand that they're buying the most of. But you don't know what come first, Did you start
the rep that I'm the best friends with?
So so anyway, yeah, the one who took me to Hawaii.
Right. No,
we won't go that far. That would be unethical.
Well,
maybe.
I understand what you're saying. But on the flip side, let's be honest, right? If you ran a company and doing those things didn't work, you wouldn't do it. So I understand what you're saying, but it obviously creates influence, and I'll leave that that's a bigger bite off.
Oh yeah, it is. But I'm just saying that I look at these audiology Facebook pages and that where people are saying who's having good luck with noise reduction. It isn't about good luck. There's published articles that tell you exactly which one will be the best. It isn't about luck.
Yeah, I agree. I think the hard part, obviously, is, as you know, things are changing. And so that's actually one of the interesting things. And this is a comment on just the overall industry. As there's consolidation and the manufacturers start buying practices, then practices get wedded to one particular product, regardless of whether or not that company has, at this particular time, the best product available. And that's actually one of the reasons, as a philosophical thing, we as an organization won't do that because we want to be able to offer whatever is the current best technology.
There's, as I say, I was in private practice for 5 years. There's a very good reason to probably only fit 2 brands because they're difficult to program, and you need to have something that you're familiar with because then you will indeed do the best for your patients. Right. And so, there's a good reason for that. But hopefully before you ever pick those 2 brands, there was some background research that went into it.
Right. Fair enough. I agree 100%. And I think that that's a very systematic and a really wonderfully reasonable way to approach it. And obviously, you've thought about it and you've been around this industry for quite some time. So we've been talking about real ear measurement or probe mic verification, I think is the other term that's used. So can you, and obviously the punchline is it should be used. I mean, I think there's no ambiguity to that, but can you talk a little bit about the history of the development or the thought behind it? Where did at some point, ultimately we're trying to make sure that people are getting presented to their cochlea and their brain the optimal or right amount of information. That's the underlying assumption, unless I'm misstating it.
Yeah, no.
So, but what was the evolution and what was it before? Like people were sitting around and somebody must have, said, hey, we should try this, right?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, there's let's just take one method that's by far the most popular. There's a second method, but this is by far the most popular with adults, and that's called the National Acoustic Laboratories method, normally just referred to as the NAL, that was developed in Australia. The first publication was in 1977, I believe. And so this relates, they came up with a way that you could take a person's hearing loss, maybe also look at their loudness levels, and you could come up with a prescription of how much gain that they should have. In those days, hearing aids were linear, so you only really needed one gain number. And then it was, well, how do you know if you got it right? Well, until 1983 or so, the only way we knew that if we got it right or close to right is we had to sit a person down in a test booth, and we would test them unaided. Then we would test them aided, subtract the difference, and see if we had the desired gain that was called for in the prescription. Okay. Right. Test reliability is terrible. There's a lot of variables, but it's all we had. Right. So we were delighted in the early 1980s when probe microphone measures, real ear measures, they're all the same, when they came along. And there was a group of us, I guess we would be considered the early adopters that, put in our budget to buy 4 systems, or whatever we could get, because that was then the way. So we had this prescriptive method. And now test-retest, by the way, on probe microphone testing is about 2 dB. So now we have a very accurate way to see if what we want at the eardrum is really at the eardrum. And so then over years, hearing aids developed and the prescriptive methods developed so that we didn't have just one single gain value per frequency, but we had targets, prescriptive targets for soft sounds, for average sounds, and for loud sounds. And again, our probe mic equipment allows us to measure that very precisely, again, within a couple dB of accuracy. So you need 2 things. You need a gold standard, and we have that. And then you need a tool to see if you're meeting the gold standard. And the only tool we have to see if you're meeting the gold standard is real ear measures. There isn't a plan B. There is no other tool.
Agreed. And so can you describe the actual technology or the machinations of what we do when we do?
Yeah. There's what you hang on the ear a device that has 2 microphones. The one microphone is a monitor microphone, regulating microphone that makes sure that if you are you're presenting a sound from a loudspeaker, and this assures that if indeed you say, I want a signal of 60 dB, that it really is 60 dB right as it enters the ear. So this is like a calibration.
Outside.
Pardon me?
On the outside of the ear.
On the outside of the ear. Okay. The second microphone has a tube attached to it probably about 50 millimeters or so, I'd say, is the tube. And what you do initially is you calibrate this tube, which then the machine corrects for the effects of the sound going through the tube, and the tube becomes acoustically invisible. So it's like you're putting the microphone down by the eardrum. So what you then do very carefully is you slide this tube down the ear canal. Probe mic systems in just the last few years have a very convenient little device that's because they look for waveform cancellations as you're sending this tube down the ear canal, and it shows up on your fitting screen, and it will tell you when you're 5 millimeters from the eardrum.
It's the
and if you're
on your car.
Pardon me?
It's the backup camera in your car.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Except more precise. I wish it would go down to 5 millimeters. I have a tight fit in my garage.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's it's the same concept. As you're getting closer, it lets you know.
Exactly. And so what happens then? So now you can do the measurements as if the microphone was right at the eardrum. So now you're ready to roll. So now you have your fitting targets of what it should be. So now you can take the hearing aid and you do a pre-fitting. If you're going to fit to this prescriptive method I mentioned, you would pre-fit it using the manufacturer's algorithm, which isn't very good, by the way, which is why we have to do the probe mic measures, but at least it's a starting point.
Right.
And so then what you start doing is delivering a real speech signal, not real speech, but it's a signal that has been designed to mimic average long-term real speech, okay, right, which is called LTAS. And you deliver that signal and you look at the output at the eardrum. And how it compares to the targets that are on this screen. And what you then do,
I'm sorry to interrupt. You've taken their prior audiogram and put that in to show what you have to get.
Correct. The probe mic equipment. So we have two things going on. We have the fitting software, which is sitting over here, and what we have then right in front of the patient is the probe mic equipment, which also has its fitting software. So you enter the person's hearing loss into that. You tell the that equipment some other things about the person. Are they a new user or experienced user? Because the fitting algorithm adjusts for those kind of things. The one algorithm even adjusts whether it's a male or a female. Males like things just a little louder, only a couple dB than females. If it's a kid, you would put in what their age is because their ear canal acoustics are different than an adult. And so you enter in all of these factors, and then the probe mic equipment calculates the fitting targets. And those fitting targets will then be on the screen, usually for soft, average, and loud, along with the patient's hearing loss, which will then let you know if you're making things audible for the patient. And it corrects everything to ear canal SPL, which is way too complicated for our talk right now, but just trust me, it does a good job. And so everything is in ear canal SPL. So the audiogram is upside down to way we're used to seeing it, but it's the right way around to make sense. Loud sounds are higher and soft sounds are softer. So most everybody's audiogram is upward sloping. And so what we then do is run these curves and try to match the three different targets the best we can. On a good day, you like to be within 3 dB. Most fitting guidelines say if you're within plus or minus 5 dB, you're probably okay. Usually we like to get just a little closer than that, but plus or minus 5 is a patient doesn't start noticing the difference too much until you get greater than 5 dB.
And so is there literature that came to that conclusion that 3 dB is what you want, or how?
The 3 dB really started with one particular manufacturer, and then people had sort of latched onto that. I'd have to ask them. That's the VeriFit equipment. I've actually dug through the actually I have to say the algorithm, the now algorithm in some of their research 10 years ago, they reported in that research that if you're plus or minus 3 dB from their target, 60% of people, it should be at their preferred loudness level for 60%. 20% should think it's too loud. 20% should think it's too soft.
Well,
So
certainly
that's one where the 3 dB came from.
certainly a lot better than people who are 20 dB off or 15
Yes,
off.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then 5 dB, I think, are in fitting guidelines just to be a little more generous and realistic. That a lot of times, particularly with, let's say, a downward sloping loss where it drops down to 75, 80 in the highs, getting within 3 dB might not be realistic for that.
Thanks for tuning in to the ListenUp Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.